For more on this, we bring in our expert, Sourabh Gupta. He's the resident senior fellow and the head of the Trade and Technology Program at the Institute for China-America Studies. Welcome to the show. Good to see you. Let me start with this. This legislation is sort of like second time around it's been brought forward, and with some minor modifications, I know. There was some criticism that it was actually too advantageous for chip makers. Where did we end up on the act?
Well, it is advantageous for chip makers, very advantageous, frankly. And there is criticism that broader industry is not getting the money. Just one segment of the industry, which is the semiconductor industry, is getting the getting the benefits. Now we have to understand that this act was more or less legislated and passed in the last Congress, but it was not funded in the last Congress. And this was then tied up together with a larger competition, China competition bill, which the plan was to pass it. That competition bill has mostly fallen apart, but the chip part remains, and that is being funded and moved through the Congress.
I looked at some of the reaction from chip stocks, both in the US and also in China. It seemed to me that sort of everybody was up a little bit, and maybe the idea that this bill alone would help the U.S. compete directly with China, it seems to be perhaps, maybe it's the wrong word, but watered down, and that's why some of the chip stocks were sort of reacting positive to it, at least on the international front.
Yes, this CHIPS bill is primarily about production in America. Now remember, there is semiconductor design process where America is very, very strong beyond everybody else. There's also production of semiconductor tools to make chips, where again, America in the design element is very, very strong. But in the production part, the fabrication part, that has been cornered by East Asia. And especially after the COVID and the supply chain snafus, the feeling was that we need to have certain more amount of production capacity in this country so that everything cannot be just-in-time basis and then just-in-time fails and then everybody is stuck out here. And the purpose of it is to get just that additional production capacity. There are certain other provisions with regard to research, et cetera, but fundamentally that part was captured in the broader competitiveness bill, which has fallen apart at least for the time being. So this is just purely about having more production at home and not necessarily the most sophisticated chip production at home.
Right. A lot of people don't realize this, but you know, the United States and China have a very close working relationship when it comes to technology. Albeit there's a ton of political stuff in the background that's making a lot of noise. But at the end of the day, the two work very closely together. The Chinese buy a ton of chips from the US buys a ton of chips from China for everything from washing machines to cars. Is that relationship between the two, have we reached a different chapter? Are things more of a mature level, and they'll still compete, but they still are reliant upon each other?
That interdependence will remain. Simply because China is a massively growing market for chips. You know, just like America wants to produce chips, the Chinese market for chips required in electric vehicles, in electronics, is booming. So there is a need for American designed chips to be placed in these items, which are then sold in China. So the chip market is growing dramatically in China, and this is creating that interdependence between the two sides. What the US is trying to do is, at the most sophisticated level of chip production, create a certain degree of decoupling there so that that technology doesn't seep into at the Chinese end and China becomes a dominant or a strong player out there. So we have to understand, yes, a new chapter is being written. There's this new CHIPS alliance that the US is trying to create with some of the other, with Japan, Taiwan, South Korea. But fundamentally, there's tremendous interdependence, and the US companies will themselves say that China is the fastest growing market, and no matter what you do with regard to chip production here, do not hamstring us from that interdependence, because that benefits us from a revenue perspective.
Yeah, you have to wonder sometimes. We focus so much on US, China, and they're basically going to be making most of the chips in the world. The rest of the world must be watching this thinking, you know, they have no chance, because the amount of investment and infrastructure needed to build chip factories, along with the maintenance, by the way, is incredible. Here's my question, though. Do you think it's right that governments step in to subsidize what should or was what we considered a private industry?
That's a tricky question. Let me frame it that way. In terms of just pure production, chip production, I don't think it's really a smart idea to put excess subsidies. You are going to create overcapacity, and and folks are going to cannibalize each other in the process. But I will say, in the broader semiconductor research segment, in terms of basic research, basic advanced research, private markets don't do that too well. And typically, breakthrough disruptive technologies need government backing at the basic research stage. If government funds are plowed in out there, I think there's tremendous multiplier effects. And so it's a little difficult difficult to exactly pinpoint. You want to do it for basic research, but one also has to understand, because of these supply chain snafus, there is a need for at least a certain amount of more domestic production. And that is what the CHIP Act is fundamentally focused on. And if they were focused on a larger issue of actual full-fledged competition, the bilateral, the competition bill was the ideal vehicle. But as I've said, that bill has kind of fallen through for a variety of political reasons.
Well, for a tricky question, it's a very complete answer. Sourabh Gupta joining us from a city we know very well, Bethesda, just outside of DC here. Thank you very much. Excellent analysis there.